Secret of the Mimic is probably my favorite FNAF game of all time. It also delivered the best story of any FNAF game in a way that's actually straightforward and understandable. But even while the main narrative is pretty clear, the game still left a few things shrouded in mystery, one of which is the Cradle. The Cradle is only mentioned in a couple places, with one being an email Fiona sent to Edwin telling him to make it, and the other being at the end of the game where we run Cradle.exe on a computer called Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage No. 1, or MXES for short. But the Cradle actually affects the story a lot more than you would think for how sparsely it's mentioned, and it probably overturns a lot of what you've heard about the game's story. And there's one thing about the Cradle in particular that has been driving me insane the past few days. For this video, I'm going to assume you're mostly familiar with the game's general narrative, such as what M1 and M2 are. What you've probably heard is that M1 and M2 aren't two separate endos, but simply separate programs. In order to make M2, Edwin built the F10N4 machine to transfer M1's program into, so he could use the same endo for M2. It was only after this that M2 started mimicking David, which caused Edwin to beat it up, leading to M2 acting violent, prompting the creation of the Cradle. But this is chronologically impossible, and it's mostly due to one specific text log. In Edwin's office, you can find this email whose binary title translates to hurt. Edwin, please talk to me. We need to stop it together. Here are the blueprints for a Cradle. It can keep David safe and provide boundaries. It's a type of computer, and it's bigger than anything you've done before. If you won't finish the program, consider building the Cradle. It will keep people safe. So the Cradle is a type of computer, Fiona, or M1, designed to keep David safe and provide boundaries, as well as keep people safe. David here is obviously referring to M2 after it's begun mimicking David. M1 wants to rebuild their family and would refer to M2 as David. The fact that M1 says we need to stop it together and implies that people are in danger from it indicates that M2 is a threat, which would only be after Edwin beat it up and it learned rage. Now, what does the Cradle do specifically? We'll get back to that. For now, I want to note that the Cradle computer is clearly the computer we run Cradle.exe on in the parachute ending, the Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage, or MXES No. 1. Earlier in the game, we also get the Mimic blueprints off of an Experimental Storage No. 2. Since this computer appears before MXES No. 1 in the game, it's possible that Experimental Storage No. 2's full name was redacted in order to not give away the revelation of what MXES stands for yet. Regardless, these computers are clearly referencing each other, so they seem to be two of the same thing, meaning that we have two MXES machines. Intuitively, it seems like if there are two MXES machines, and one of them says F10N4 on the side rather than MXES like the one from Ruin, it would be the other experimental storage that is the MXES from Ruin. I'll give more reasons for why this is probably the case, but for now we're going with MXES No. 1, the computer that runs Cradle.exe, being the MXES from Ruin, and MXES No. 2 being F10N4. All of this is incredibly confusing. Why are there two identical machines? Why did Edwin seemingly build two of the giant Cradle computers M1 told him to build, let alone put M1 herself into one? But the really confusing part is the chronology issue. F10N4 cannot have been built at the time of this email. Obviously, the Cradle computer had not yet been built when M1 was telling Edwin to build it. But like I said, even I don't think the Cradle we access at the end of the game is even F10. So what's the issue? The problem is that M1 tells Edwin it's a type of computer bigger than anything you've done before. This would not be true if Edwin had already built an identical computer of the same size, F10N4. Also, if the Cradle M1 is talking about is MXES No. 1, while F10 is MXES No. 2, it makes no sense that No. 2 would have been built before No. 1. So if F10 has not been built yet, that means M1 must still be inside the Mimic endoskeleton. And if M2 has clearly already been built and is acting violent, that means M1 and M2 were inhabiting endos at the same time, meaning there were two separate Mimic endos. There are also other things pointing to M2 being in a separate endo from M1's. Fiona tells Edwin,
You need to try again. Build another.
Build implies a physical endo rather than just another program to put inside the same endo M1 is currently in. M1 also calls the blueprints we retrieve specifically M2 blueprints, seeming to imply that M2 is a separate endo with its own blueprints. The word blueprints also usually refers to physical things rather than programs. So why would you have blueprints for M2 if it was created to be put in the same body as M1? Edwin's other failed attempts at M2 were also physically different endos, as evidenced by the mimiclings at the end of the game, called Protomimics in the files. Now, there are some counterpoints. For instance, while Edwin's other attempts were all physical, since they all failed, he might have resorted to using M1's endo, which actually worked. And in Moon.exe, where we seem to be playing as the Mimic, we interact with the baby owl, representing David, until the owl dies and we put on its mask, representing the Mimic pretending to be David. This could be implying that the same Mimic endo that kept David company was the one to later mimic him. But if we're taking Moon.exe that literally, that would also imply that M1, the sun, is separate from the endo who took care of an alive David, which doesn't make sense. At any rate, this still does nothing to solve the chronology issue, contradicting the events indicated by the Cradle email. It's still impossible for M1 and M2 to have been in the same endo. But now that we've established M1 and M2 must have had their own endoskeletons and existed simultaneously, we're left with the following questions. What happened to M1's endo and why don't we see it? Why did Edwin make a second MXES for M1 and put her inside it? Why did Edwin not put M2 in the MXES he must have specifically created for it? And what even are these two machines? What does the Cradle even do? I haven't seen many explanations for how it's supposed to work. We now know that there are two Cradles, MXES number 1, the one from the parachute ending and Ruin, and MXES number 2, F10 and 4. Since M1 gave Edwin the blueprints for MXES, and the two machines are identical to each other, and neither existed prior to this, they must be the same type of machine, both of them Cradles. We also know that MXES is short for Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage. X-Form is often short for Transform, so this should really read as Mechanical Transform Experimental Storage. The Mimic changes shape, or transforms, to fit into any costume, even being referred to as a shapeshifter in the name of the song for his chase. So if Mechanical Transform refers to the Mimic, we then have Mimic Experimental Storage. This fits perfectly with what F10 and 4 is, which stores M1 inside it. MXES number 1 should function similarly to F10 anyway. M1 tells Edwin that the Cradle will keep David safe and provide boundaries, which seems like it fits with what F10 does. The Cradle being made to store M2 the same way F10 stores M1 would keep others safe while also preserving M2, keeping it secure. Since the machine is so big, it might even be meant to contain the endo itself, explaining where M1's endo would have gone. Obviously though, MXES must be more sophisticated than just this for it to be able to do what it does in Ruin, but I think that's its basic purpose. MXES number 2 doesn't need Cradle.exe to be run by us, since it's already holding the Mimic intended for it, M1. Cradle.exe is probably already running. MXES number 1, on the other hand, is empty, and it makes sense the machine that still needs to run Cradle.exe would be the one without a Mimic contained in it, since that's the Cradle's purpose. When we run Cradle.exe on MXES number 1, that probably activates it to do its purpose in Ruin. The entity, which is probably Cradle.exe itself, doesn't try to capture the Mimic inside it, but I'm guessing that's because it physically can't. Instead, it fulfills its same purpose, to keep M2 secure, or hidden as Gregory says, in a different way. So that answers what the Cradles do, but why are there two of them? This is something I don't really have an answer for. Since the Ruin MXES is likely number 1, and F10 is number 2, that means Edwin created the one for M2 first. But then, even before putting M2 inside, he apparently created a second Cradle for M1 and put her inside that. Maybe he planned to put M2 in the first MXES afterward, but then died, or whatever happened to him, before he could do it. But why did he put M1 in a Cradle to begin with? Maybe he was finally fed up with M1 and wanted her stored away in the same way, and for some reason this took priority over M2. I don't know. Ultimately, I don't have good answers for the following questions. Why did Edwin put M1 in a type of machine M1 specifically designed for M2? And why didn't Edwin ever put M2 in the first Cradle? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. At any rate, we've established that M1 and M2 must have been separate endos, with M1 only being put into F10 after M2 started acting up. There's no other way. The chronological order of events demands this. Seems like a pretty good theory, right? Wrong, because there's a gaping hole in this theory I haven't mentioned. See, the mailbox we get the Cradle email from actually contains another text log. This one's binary title translates to sad, and it reads, "Edwin, are we losing our home? I don't understand. Wasn't I good enough?" From the mailbox outside of Edwin's house, we learn that he's received a foreclosure notice on the house only 5 weeks ago. So this text log where M1 mentions them losing their home must be from the past 5 weeks. This is important because every time multiple text logs are in the same mailbox, they always appear in chronological order. And this email about the house comes before the one about the Cradle, meaning that unless this one specific mailbox breaks the trend of chronologically ordered logs, the Cradle log can't be from longer than 5 weeks ago. Now, one excuse we could make is that Edwin only built F10 recently in the past 5 weeks. But the "Have you heard Fiona" text log seems to contradict this. It has an employee overhearing Edwin laughing with Fiona down in R&D, which is obviously him talking with F10, which is located in R&D. So he must have transferred M1 to F10 while MCM still had employees. In other words, probably not 5 weeks ago. Another thing pointing to the Cradle email having been sent after the creation of F10 is that both of these logs have their titles in binary, and M1 also mentions Edwin not talking to her, which seems more in line with F10 trying to reach him from the machine. No matter what, we have a blatant contradiction somewhere. It's one of either two things. Either F10 was built prior to the Cradle log, in which case the log is wrong about Edwin not having built a computer that big before, and F10 is just identical to MXES for literally no reason as they're completely unrelated, or the chronological order of the logs is wrong specifically here and nowhere else in the game, along with some other oddities. Ultimately, there are two possible timelines of events, each with their own problems. In the first timeline, M1 is created and David dies. Then, Edwin creates M2 in a separate endo, and it ends up mimicking David, causing Edwin to beat it up. M1 sends Edwin the Cradle email telling him to build it to stop M2. Edwin then builds both MXES number 1 and F10 at the same time, and puts M1 inside F10. After this, the explosion happens and Edwin is injured and possibly killed. The Murrays receive the foreclosure notice, and M1 sends the sad email, either now or before the explosion. The problem here is that the mail order implies the Cradle email came from within the past 5 weeks. This seems to necessitate that M1 was already in F10 before the Cradle or M2 were built. In the second timeline, after David's death, Edwin builds F10 and puts M1's program inside, so he can use the endo as a body for M2. M2 mimics David and Edwin beats it up. It's at this point that the Murrays receive the foreclosure notice, and M1 sends the sad email, after which M1 also sends the email telling Edwin to build the Cradle. Edwin builds MXES number 1, and then the explosion happens, injuring/killing Edwin. The problems here are that the Cradle email says it would be a computer bigger than anything Edwin had made, which is not true because of the existence of F10. The MXES with Cradle.exe on it is also MXES number 1, which makes no sense if it was built second. And even ignoring the comment about it being a bigger computer than Edwin's ever built, if F10 isn't supposed to be another Cradle, why is it identical to the Cradle and seemingly has the exact same function? And if F10 is a Cradle, shouldn't that mean it was only built after M1 gave Edwin the blueprints for the Cradle? I put off on making this video for a while until I had a solid answer, but I couldn't find one. It really just doesn't work either way. If I had to choose one of the two timelines, I'd pick the first, with two separate mimic endos in both F10 and MXES number 1 being made after M2 was created and started acting up. The second timeline of events is just fundamentally contradictory for F10 to exist before the Cradle and before M2. The first timeline's problems, however, can be mostly done away with by just switching the chronological order of the two text logs. But again, neither of these work cleanly. I'd love to hear more opinions on this though. What do you guys think? Was there only one mimic endo with F10 being created before M2? Or were there two endos with F10 and MXES being made after M2 was built? Let me know. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Bye.